In this lesson, we're going to carry on talking about different beliefs and teachings within the doctrines of Christianity, and we're going to focus on one of the most important of these, this being the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the most important of the different stories that are expressed within the Bible, specifically within the book of Matthew. So, in previous lessons, we have been exploring various instances of different teachings of Jesus, talking about things like forgiveness, things like love. There is also teachings of Jesus' performance of miracles and the extent to which they can actually inform our understanding of how it means, or what it means, sorry, to act in a Christian way as a result of the ways in which he would use miracles to perform certain moral lessons, essentially moral teachings. And we looked at the beliefs in teachings as well as Jesus being the Son of God, i.e. the idea of the concept of the Trinity, the idea that he is God incarnate, meaning he is God in human form, that he is the Saviour of humanity, and then of course the moral teachings that we have explored as well. Well, the most significant of this, probably the most significant of these teachings, is his Sermon on the Mount, which is something that is found in the book of Matthew, and we're going to explore in this lesson in a great amount of detail every single aspect of this sermon and what it actually can tell us about the ways in which Jesus prescribes how one ought to live their life as a Christian thinker. So, it's a particularly long passage in the Bible. It's found in the book of Matthew, from around 5 to 7, and you can divide the sermon itself into 6 main subsections. They're not completely perfect in the ways in which they are delineated, but you can sort of see how Jesus would go from one bit to the next bit, and you can look at how each of them sort of fit together within the broader meaning of the sermon itself. So the first of these is the concept of blessings. We then talk about the law. We then talk about the idea of discipleship, and then righteousness, the narrow path analogy, which we will explore in a minute, as well as the solid foundations analogy. Both of these analogies giving us an indication of the kinds of moral messages that ought to be prescribed within the Christian thoughts. So, beginning with blessings, the first part of the sermon, what it does is it introduces a number of blessings. These are known as beatitudes, and there are 9 that are presented in this sermon. So, in Matthew 5:3, we say that blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In Matthew 5:4, he says that blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Matthew 5:5 says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Matthew 5:6, blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Again, that's Matthew 5:7. 5:8 talks about blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. 5:9 is blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. 5:10, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And then finally, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and they shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. So Matthew 5:5 to 5:11 give us a good indication of the kinds of things that we're talking about for blessing. They essentially include the blessing itself, so the blessing of whoever it is, whether it be the mourning, whether it be those who are meek, whether it be those who are hungry and thirsty, merciful, pure of heart, peacemakers, etc. And then it gives us a justification for why they are blessed. So we bless those that are mourn, for they shall be comforted. We bless those that are pure in heart, for they shall see God. We bless the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. That's essentially the general structure of the blessings that take place in the first part of the sermon. We can see as well that the first 3 blessings, so Matthew 5:4 to 6, Jesus is trying to show his followers that in order to truly live a better life, they have to understand their own needs as well. You can notice in the first 3 or 4 that we're talking about those who are poor in spirit, we're talking about those who mourn, those who are meek, those who are hungry and are thirsty after righteousness. And then the middle blessings focus on the search for God, the search for truth, and the search for righteousness. So the middle blessings talking about the merciful, we're talking about those who are pure in heart, we're talking about those, again, who are hungry and thirsty after righteousness. And then finally, those final blessings are the ones who are directed to those who are suffering. So blessed for those who are persecuted for their righteousness, for the righteousness' sake. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you as well. Again, these are blessing people who are suffering in some kind of way. So that's how we can split the blessings up, and that's how we can understand what the blessings actually mean. What about the second section of the sermon? Well, the second section talks about the law. In this section, Jesus offers an alternative interpretation of the law, which was originally brought down by Moses in the Old Testament. Now, in Matthew 5:17, he says, I think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Jesus teaches that one's obedience to the law must come from their heart, rather than from some external show of obedience. This is because God is omniscient and therefore will truly believe everything that is in people's hearts. So, what this does is we can tie this and make a link back to the concept of the nature of God, being omniscient, being somebody who is all-knowing, and we can make the link that people who follow the law for the wrong reasons will not be able to get away with it, essentially, because God will have an understanding and God will know if you are following it for the right reasons, i.e. if your obedience to the law comes from your heart, or rather it comes from an external showing of obedience. You want to be seen as somebody who is obedient to the law. So again, you can tie this link to the nature of God as well. And in Matthew 5:20, they say, For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness, of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven, or enter into the kingdom of heaven. So again, talking about the concept of righteousness and talking about the concept of what actually constitutes being righteousness for the purposes of what God would describe as righteousness, i.e. who shall and who shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. The third of the 6 sections in the sermon include the concept of discipleship. During this part, Jesus makes a case for what is to be known as true discipleship. At the start, he rejects the use of prayer for the purposes of show, so the external showing of prayer. So from Matthew 6:5, he says, And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are. For they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. So this is an indication of those who pray standing in synagogues or on the corners of streets are praying not for the relationship that they want to have with God, or praying for some kind of internal motivated reason. They're praying because they want to be seen by other people as being praying. And so it signifies that the message of true discipleship is to have faith in God and prayer, not just when others are watching, but when you are also in private. If you only do prayer and you only show any kind of commitment to God when others are around you, then it implies that you are not really interested in doing or being at one or have any kind of relationship with God. It just implies that you want to be seen as somebody who has a relationship with God. And so this idea of prayer in private or in secret is actually exemplified in the very next passage in Matthew 6:6, because he says in Matthew 6:6, but thou when thou prayest, enter into thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which is seeth in secret shall reward thy openly. I think we should all make it very clear that the version of the Bible that I've taken these quotes from is the King James variation, which is why we have a lot of very old-timey language that is used in these quotes. It doesn't actually matter which variation of the Bible you use, so long as you have a general idea of what these quotes actually are saying. It is also in this section as well that Jesus gives us what is known today as the Lord's Prayer, which you should all have a general understanding of what this is. And this goes from Matthew 6, 9 to 13. I'm not going to go out through and recite the Lord's Prayer. It's very, very common. It's very, very easy to remember. I personally remember having to say it every single week for my entire time at school. So just a general idea from Matthew 6, 9 to 13, we have the Lord's Prayer, which is handed down also in the sermon. The next section is the concept of righteousness. And in this section, what Jesus does is gives a proper account of how one can effectively worship God. So he begins by stating very clearly that one cannot worship God through the use of money or riches, okay? But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through the steel. Nor steal, sorry. This is in Matthew 6:20. Again, in this section, Jesus also teaches about judgment of others. In Matthew 7, 1 to 2, he says that judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. Okay, so again, trying my best to read the James Version of the Bible and giving another indication of what really is the effective method of worshipping God. Not doing it through the use of monetary value or being enriched or any kind of materialistic ideas, but doing it rather through other methods, do it through more spiritual means. The final of the two parts of the Sermon on the Mount are two analogies that are given. The first is known as the gateway analogy, and the second is the one based on solid foundations. So these two sections direct us to consider two analogies, the first being the narrow gateway. And with this narrow gateway, what we have here is that Jesus likens a broad pathway as a life without the attention of the laws of God. So he describes as those who are not at one in any kind of relationship with God as having a life on a broad pathway. A life with God is a narrow pathway, one that can be more difficult to lead from time to time, but is still nevertheless worth it in the end. And so while the narrow pathway is difficult at the time in life, and it can be difficult and it can be very tricky to follow that pathway in any all the time, you may sometimes stray off the pathway, but as long as you get back on it, okay, the person on such a pathway will be rewarded in heaven versus the person who does not have a relationship with God, who walks on a broad pathway, a life that is quite easy to live, a life that does not require any kind of discipline or any kind of commitment to God. So Matthew 7:13 gives us the idea that we have got here. He says, "Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in threat." So the broad pathway, the wide gate, is the one that leadeth to destruction, not the one that is narrow, the narrow pathway analogy. In this section, as well as part of the analogy, we also see Jesus' warning of the idea of false prophets. Matthew 7:15 says, "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." The final of the sections for the Sermon on the Mount is the solid foundations analogy. And this final analogy describes a building built on a solid rock versus one that is built on sandy foundations. So we have two different buildings that are constructed. One is on solid foundations, the other one is not on solid foundations. The latter of which will be washed away in storms, but the former will not. Matthew 7:24-25 says, "Therefore whosoever hath these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which has built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock." Very, very interesting. The idea being that being able to follow the teachings and the sayings of Jesus, being able to follow the life of the Christian doctrine, being able to follow a life that involves a relationship with God, involves building a house constructing a house, constructing a life essentially on a solid rock foundation, whereby if you have followed the teachings of Jesus, so as he wants you to do, you can build this house on solid foundations, such that if rain descended, floods came, winds blew and beat upon the house, it will not fall, compared to somebody who follows who builds their house on sandy foundations, somebody who does not follow the teachings of Jesus, and therefore the house will eventually come down. What is interesting about both of these analogies is they essentially describe the same thing, describing on the one hand that following a life of a relationship with God is following a narrow path. It can be quite difficult to do, but in the end, the reward is very satisfactory. Similarly, building the solid foundations is something that will require you to have to deal with the rain coming at you, the floods coming at you, the winds blowing at you, but all of these things are okay because you've built a house on a solid foundation. So therefore, by following the teachings of Jesus and following a relationship with God, you have the foundation to have a strong connection with God, whatever the things life may throw at someone. So that's essentially the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5:5 all the way to 7:25.